Sandi Patty, to do this taping today in this room, this is a very historic room.
The call came when most people had already walked away. Sandi Patty, the woman with the most celebrated voice in gospel music history, was sitting in the wreckage of a very public personal failure, and the Christian music world had gone largely silent around her. Then the phone rang. It was Bill Gaither. What he said in the next 15 minutes set the direction of the rest of her life. But to understand what that call really meant, you have to go back to 1992, and what you'll find there changes everything about how we see Sandi Patty. Before we go any further, if you love the untold stories behind gospel music's greatest voices, go ahead and subscribe right now. We share stories like this every week, and next, we'll tell you about the day Bill Gaither quietly gathered his closest friends for what many are calling a final recording session, a story that has never been shared publicly. You don't want to miss it. Sandi Patty is 72 years old now, and her voice has carried more weight than most people carry in a lifetime. She won 5 Grammy Awards and 40 Dove Awards, more than any other artist in the history of Christian music. When she recorded We Shall Behold Him in 1982, she gave a generation of believers the song they would sing for the rest of their lives. She performed at the Statue of Liberty Centennial Celebration in 1986, before an estimated 250 million television viewers. She was not just a gospel singer, she was the voice of a faith that millions of Americans quietly carried inside themselves. Bill Gaither is 90 years old, and his name is bound to the survival and renewal of Southern gospel in ways no one else can claim. He launched the Homecoming concert series in 1991, gathering the legends of gospel music in a living room in Alexandria, Indiana, and letting the cameras roll. Those recordings eventually produced more than 60 videos and sold tens of millions of copies. Bill Gaither didn't just document gospel music history, he kept it alive when the rest of the industry had moved on. More than anything, he created a stage where legacy was treated as a living thing, where the old voices and the new ones could stand together in the same room and remind each other of why any of it mattered in the first place. These two people have been linked for decades. But the moment that linked them most deeply was a phone call Sandi Patty has described as one of the most important conversations of her life. By the early 1990s, Sandi Patty had built a career that no one in gospel music had ever matched. 40 Dove Awards, 5 Grammy wins, songs that had become a permanent part of the church calendar for millions of families across America. She had sung at presidential inaugurations. She had stood at the foot of the Statue of Liberty, with a nation watching. Her records moved in ways that gospel albums simply didn't move. But behind the public image, her first marriage was quietly coming apart. She had married John Helvering in 1977, and by the late 1980s, the relationship had grown strained in ways that most people around her never saw. What no one outside her inner circle knew was that she had begun an affair with Don Peslis, the road manager for her touring band. Don was also married at the time. The affair continued for several years before it came into public view. In 1992, Sandi made a formal confession to her church and to her record label's leadership. The response from the Christian music world was swift and largely silent. Radio stations pulled her music. Industry relationships went cold. The Dove Award organization suspended her eligibility while she entered what they called a restoration process. The Christian music world in the early 1990s was not structured to absorb that kind of fall. It was an industry built around ideals, around the projection of a faith life that was steady, clean, and untouched by the same fractures that marked ordinary life. When Sandi Patty's story became public, it didn't just complicate her career. It raised questions for an entire industry about what it actually believed about the people it had spent decades turning into symbols. The weight of what followed was not only professional. Sandi had 4 children. She had built her entire public identity around a deep and visible faith. And now that faith, that identity, and those relationships were all in a moment of profound reckoning at the same time. The version of herself that millions of people had trusted, the version she herself had trusted, was being rebuilt from the ground up. She and Don Peslis eventually married in 1995, after both their previous marriages had ended. But in the years between the public confession and that marriage, Sandi was moving through something for which the Christian music world had almost no established vocabulary, no clear path forward for a woman whose name had come to mean purity, power, and praise, now walking through the most isolating chapter of her adult life. And then the phone rang. Bill Gaither didn't call to offer advice. He didn't call to carry a message from the industry about what she needed to do next. He called because, in his own telling, she was his friend, and friends don't disappear when things get hard. Sandi has spoken about this call in interviews over the years, and what she has always said is that the opening of the conversation set the tone for everything that followed. Bill told her he loved her, not her voice, not her career, not her ministry record, her. He told her that nothing that had happened changed the way he felt about who she was as a person. That might sound simple, but for a woman whose entire sense of belonging in the Christian music world had been built on performance, on Sunday morning perfection, those words were something she had not been sure she would ever hear again. She had received some support from people close to her, but the broader industry had been quiet. The silence from the world she had served for more than 15 years was something she carried every single day. Bill Gaither was not calling from the edges of that world. He was at its center. And when the person at the center of everything reaches through the silence to say your name with warmth, it changes the weight of everything you have been carrying. He said he wanted her back, not eventually, not once the restoration was officially complete, but now, as herself, exactly as she was. For Sandi, that was the hinge point, not the industry's slow eventual reopening, not the gradual thaw that came over months and years. The hinge point was that one person, the right person, said, "Come back," and meant it. Bill's approach to Sandi's return was not quiet or conditional. He made an active decision to include her in his world, and he didn't hide it. In the years that followed, he would introduce her on stage with the same warmth he extended to every other artist in that circle. There was no asterisk next to her name, no quiet caveat offered to the audience. She was simply Sandi, one of theirs. She appeared on Gaither homecoming recordings. The cameras showed her singing again, standing among the legends of gospel music, welcomed as one of their own. He did not separate her story from the story of grace that was the entire point of everything the homecoming series had ever been about. Sandi has described the first time she sang in one of those homecoming settings after the years of silence as one of the most emotionally complex moments of her career. She was not certain how the other artists would receive her. She was not certain how it would feel to stand at a microphone again in that world. What she found was that the room received her exactly the way Bill had told her it would, with warmth, without the weight of everything that had happened hovering in the air between them. The audience for those homecoming recordings already knew her story. They had read about it in newspapers and heard it discussed from pulpits, and they came anyway. Some of them came because of it, because they too had known failure, and they needed to see what the other side of it looked like. The homecoming stage gave her a space to be imperfect and beloved at the same time. And that was something the broader Christian music industry, with all its infrastructure and influence, had not figured out how to do. What Bill Gaither understood, and what that phone call carried across the line between them, was that the story wasn't over. It was changing, and he wanted to be part of what came next. The woman who answered that phone call in 1992 is 72 years old now, and she has had decades to consider what it meant. Sandi Patty went on to record more than 30 albums. She returned to major stages. She became a presence in the Gaither homecoming world that audiences came specifically to see, to hear, to be moved by. The voice did not diminish, and the story, with all of its pain and all of its improbability, became one of the most recognized restoration narratives in the history of American gospel music. What is worth sitting with is the specific shape of what Bill Gaither chose to do. He did not wait for the restoration process to be officially complete. He did not monitor the situation from a distance and make a call once it seemed safe. He called when it wasn't safe, when the ground around her was still unsettled, when the outcome was still uncertain. He made the decision that she was worth the association before the world had decided whether to forgive her. What it reveals about the homecoming world, the community he built over more than 30 years, is that grace is not only a word they sing about. At its best moments, it is something they practice. The homecoming stage welcomed artists who were aging, artists who were ill, artists the mainstream industry had long since moved past. It was not a stage for perfection. It was built for people who had lived long enough to know what they believed and what they needed. Bill Gaither has spent 6 decades building something larger than any single song or any single recording. He built a community, and the true measure of a community is not what it does with the people who are thriving, it is what it does with the people who are broken. That phone call to Sandi Patty in 1992 is the clearest answer to that question that anyone in this world has ever offered. Sandi Patty still sings, and when she opens her mouth, the voice is still there, shaped by everything it has carried, and all the more beautiful for it. Thank you for sitting with this story today. It's the kind of story that deserves to be told. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. And next, we're going to tell you about the day Bill Gaither quietly gathered his closest friends for what many are calling a final recording session, a story that has never been shared publicly. You'll want to be there.